Reserves. The gentleman from Massachusetts is recognized.
Yeah, Madam Speaker, the gentleman keeps on talking about crime in D.C., crime crime on the rise. I can tell you one thing: crime is definitely down in the White House right now. And
Representative Jim McGovern is just so strong with what I would call his dry humour. Always gets the facts, sticks to the points, but delivers it in such a real entertaining way. And it shouldn't be entertaining because he's making some very serious points. But to me, I find him such a breath of fresh, honest air.
And I can understand why the gentleman is confused. Madam Speaker, I request unanimous consent to insert into the record an article from the Washington Post entitled, "Crime is Down, Though Fox News Viewers Might Not Be Aware."
Without objection.
The article notes, and I quote, "The reality is that crime surged in 2020 when Trump was president. That surge continued into the Biden administration, but has since waned," end quote. And Madam Speaker, in the lead up to the 2022 midterms, Fox News invested immense resources in promoting stories about surging crime despite lacking evidence. And while crime is down, it appears the conservative ecosystem is trying to fearmonger the issue of crime once again because, that's all they have. Madam Speaker, I also request unanimous consent to insert into the record an article from The Guardian entitled, "Crime Coverage on Fox News Halved Once U.S. Midterms Were Over."
Without objection.
So after a frenzy of coverage about violent crime in September and October of 2022, the conservative media giant Fox News actually decreased coverage of violent crime stories by, get this, 50% in the weeks following the 2022 elections. Crime stories have long been used by Republicans to fearmonger for cheap electoral victories, and it seems like this old tactic is being utilized once again in the 2020 and 2024, all while 80% of Republicans support cutting the COPS grant program. Again, Congress. And all I can say, Madam Speaker, is the American people deserve better. And they certainly deserve better than the Speaker of the House spending his time trying to influence our justice system at a courthouse in New York City. How pathetic. When we have real problems that we need to deal with here in this country, he's in New York trying to explain away, like a staffer, all of Donald Trump's problems, quite frankly. I'm trying to think of a way to stay with an order here with the new rules. It's pathetic. It's pathetic. That's where the Speaker of the House is spending his time, trying to rationalize all of the former president's crimes. Give me a break. Madam Speaker, the American people, as I said, deserve better. I urge a strong no vote on this rule. This is just a waste of time. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time. It's probably not the best idea to take direction on law and order from a guy who, as we speak, is a defendant for covering up hush money payments to a porn star for political gain. That's not even to mention the other 3 criminal felony prosecutions that he's facing. And look at the cover of today's New York Times, Mr. Speaker. This is unbelievable. Here's a picture of the Speaker of this House of Representatives, second in line to the presidency, standing in front of a courthouse acting as a prop for Donald Trump, trying to interfere with a criminal trial because apparently Republicans like law and order unless it applies to them. Unbelievable. You can't make this stuff up. And this stunt, I'll say to my colleagues, this stunt of the Speaker and members of the Republican members of Congress going to this courthouse, this stunt diminishes this House of Representatives. Their candidate for president has been indicted more times than he's been elected.
The chair would remind members to refrain from engaging in personalities towards presumptive nominees for the office of president.
I didn't think I was. And somehow, Madam Speaker, they have the nerve to tell us about the criminal justice system. Give me a break. Their credibility on this issue has evaporated. It is pathetic.
To address the House for 1 minute. extend my remarks.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 2 years ago, a gunman drove to a black neighborhood with an assault rifle in his hand and hate in his heart, opening fire and killing 10 people in Buffalo, New York. He was radicalized by the Great Replacement theory, a white supremacist, racist, anti-Semitic conspiracy. We are still mourning the 10 souls lost to this senseless violence. The only way to move forward is to acknowledge that what is killing us in droves is hatred and continued white supremacy. Congress cannot continue to ignore these hateful and discriminatory ideologies that are being promoted by far-right MAGA extremists. I introduced a resolution to condemn the Great Replacement theory, racism, anti-Semitism, hatred, and bigotry in all its forms. We must stand up together and say clearly that white supremacy is an existential threat. We also need reparations for the black community in Buffalo and around the country, like food justice for community members and free mental health to support and address community trauma. I urge my colleagues to join me in condemning the Great Replacement theory, repairing the harms of white supremacy, and fighting to root out hatred once and for all. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
For what purpose is the gentleman from North Carolina
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My colleague across the aisle just mischaracterized the Democratic amendment that was offered during committee, and I think if he went back and looked at the record, he would see that. Mr. Speaker, this legislation purports to improve law enforcement officer safety and wellness. It seeks to do this by requiring the Attorney General and other federal officials to issue reports about attacks on officers, aggression against officers, and officer mental health. While this legislation may seem on the surface to be meaningful, let us be really clear. It is just more cheap talk from Republicans. Absolutely nothing in this bill makes a single police officer safer or invests a single dollar in officer wellness. While the collection of accurate data, including data on officer attacks and mental health, is important, this bill is unlikely to provide any new or meaningful data. By necessity, data about incidents of violence against law enforcement officers must already be initially collected and reported, if at all, by tribal, state, and local authorities who are in the best position to know about these incidents, not the Attorney General. The federal government collects this data through the participation by these authorities in voluntary data reporting programs like the National Incident-Based Reporting Program and the Law Enforcement Officers Killed and Assaulted Data Collection. But nothing in this bill provides any resources for more agencies to participate in these data collection programs, nor does it mandate any kind of reporting. Given that there is nothing in this bill to improve the underlying data that is available to the Attorney General and others, it is unlikely that the reporting required by the bill would be able to deliver any new insights that might actually improve officer safety. Democrats sought to solve this basic problem of inadequate data collection through the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act. Under that bill, states would be required to report shootings, deaths, and other uses of force involving law enforcement officers, and states would receive grants to facilitate that reporting. By both mandating and supporting data collection and reporting, the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act would significantly improve the data available to the Congress, federal agencies, and the public. Critically, unlike this legislation, that bill would require reporting of uses of force both by and against law enforcement, enabling us to have a full understanding of the dangers faced by officers as well as the injuries and deaths of civilians that are caused by police. In focusing only on attacks against officers, this bill turns a blind eye to uses of force by law enforcement against civilians, whether it is justified or not. The mental health reporting provisions of the bill are also unlikely to improve officer wellness because they fail to build on the work of past Congresses and the Biden administration. In the 115th Congress, we passed the Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness Act, a bipartisan bill signed into law by President Obama, which directed the Department of Defense, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and DOJ's Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services to report on mental health practices and services that could be adopted by law enforcement and the programs already available to them. It also expanded the availability of grant funds for law enforcement mental health and developed new educational resources. Building on this work, President Biden issued a 2022 executive order on advancing effective, accountable policing and criminal justice practices to enhance public trust and public safety. The executive order required the Attorney General to develop and publish a report on best practices to address law enforcement officer wellness and to make recommendations regarding the prevention of death by suicide of law enforcement officers. The Attorney General has already complied with this executive order, so we already know much more about the mental health resources and the needs of law enforcement. Rather than retread our steps, we should be moving forward to help our law enforcement officers implement this important work so that more officers can access the support that they need. Last Congress, under Democratic control, the House passed numerous bipartisan bills that improved law enforcement officer safety and wellness, like Protecting America's First Responders Act, the Public Safety Officer Support Act, the Confidentiality Opportunities for Peer Support, or the COPS Counseling Act, and the Law Enforcement De-Escalation Training Act. And at least 7 bipartisan law enforcement bills, many led by Republicans, have been passed by the Democratic-led Senate. These are bills that would help law enforcement and are priorities for the police groups. But so far, House Republicans have only advanced one of them. This legislation represents another wasted opportunity to work together on substantive proposals that will make our communities and the law enforcement officers that protect them safer. I urge members to oppose this legislation, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman.